So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of the 2021 Aberdeen Guyana Gateway. Thank you to those of you that attended yesterday, and if you're just joining us today, also welcome. So we're just getting everyone to join us just now, and letting everyone in. We had a huge attendance yesterday, and there's lots of people already on today, which is good to see. And we're just letting in, I think, Stacey, we're just letting in some more people.
Correct, yeah. We've got a steady stream of people joining.
Okay, right, and as Stacey, I've still got the recording message showing.
Yeah.
Over the main screen.
Yes. If anybody is not speaking, if you can please keep yourself on mute. I did get a little bit of feedback there, but I'm not sure if it was from a speaker, but just in case.
So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to day 2 of the Aberdeen Guyana Gateway. This is year 4. So the first 2 years obviously were in person, and last year and this year are digital. Now, yesterday we did a market update and had some case studies of people, UK businesses that had set up in Guyana, and they shared their journey. So following on from yesterday's market update, today we are going to look ahead and explore the future, both in terms of energy transition, but also possibilities of lessons learned from this side of the world, possibly, and how we can all collaborate and work together. Now, I'm not going to fully facilitate like I did yesterday. I am going to hand over to our chair today, and just to introduce our chair today, Stacey, can we go to the next slide? Before I do that, I'll do the housekeeping. Yeah, of course, just 3 main housekeeping items. If you could please keep your microphone on mute if you're not speaking. If you could pop any questions to the speakers in the chat, because we'll come back to the questions at the end and we'll make sure they're covered then. So pop them in the chat, and feel free to share contact details, connect on LinkedIn in the chat also, and obviously feel free to connect with myself or Stacey on LinkedIn also. So just a quick introduction of our speakers today before I hand over to the chair. I'll be introducing our chair in a minute, Greg Quinn, who is currently head of the Caribbean team at the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. Sherman, who is country director of DIT in Guyana. Richard, executive director of the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Nicholas, Guyana Oil and Gas Support Services, also former president of the Guyana Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Dr. Jonathan Wills, writer and retired environmental economist. And the Right Honourable Brian Wilson, CBE, former UK Energy Minister. So that's our very impressive speaker lineup today. So Greg, without further ado, I would like to introduce, for those that don't know Greg, he has just completed a spell as British High Commissioner in Guyana and Suriname, non-resident for Suriname, and he is now back in London and is with the Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office overseeing the Caribbean region. Greg, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Brett. Thank you all. It's a pleasure to be here again, albeit this time from the London end as opposed to the Guyana, the Houston or the Aberdeen end. And it's a pleasure to moderate this event today. 4th Aberdeen Guyana Gateway. Kudos to Brett, Stacey and the team for all of the work they've done for this. A lot of you on this call have been with us from the start, and I've certainly seen how this has gone from strength to strength. Now, whilst there's been a lot of focus, understandably, in oil and gas, and there will continue to be a lot of focus in oil and gas, I think it's never too late for us to start looking at the future and to look to things like energy transition and how that might look, because maybe with a little bit of hindsight, we here in the UK might have liked to have thought about that whenever we first discovered oil, and maybe would have appreciated the ability to be a little bit more forward thinking on this. And of course, Guyana's got huge amounts of opportunities on energy transition, renewables, all of that, which I hope we can talk about, and we can now use this time to start building that renewables, building that future energy requirement, but using the funds which will come from the oil finds. Yes, there are obviously lots of calls on those oil funds, but forward thinking, strategic thought, etc. I think we would all look and encourage Guyana to do that. We obviously have a good range of very good speakers today. Some are old friends, some are old colleagues, and in the case of the Right Honourable Brian, boss of mine at the Foreign Office, Brian came out to Ghana when I was posted there more years ago than I'm sure he or I would want to remember. We'll also have a chance to do a Q&A, so if there are some questions, please do stick those in the chat bar, and we will aim to get to those at the end. A plea from me to the speakers: you have got a time slot. Don't make me play a bad cop and have to cut you off on this. So please do stick to it. So without any further ado, let me go straight to the first speaker. And the first speaker is Sherwin Naughton, who my old colleague from Georgetown, who is the country director for the Department of International Trade in Guyana. Sherwin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Greg. And I think the time, what you spoke about time, I think that was directed at me somewhat, but I'll try to keep it within. And also thank you to Brett and Stacey for the invitation to be part of this event. I know that this is the fourth Aberdeen Guyana Gateway, and it is an activity, this is my second, and it is an activity that the Department for International Trade, we look forward to annually. It really allows us the opportunity to be in touch with UK companies and to share information that we should be considering when thinking about Guyana. The Gateway also allows for Aberdeen and Georgetown to continue to build their relationship. And on the more substantive issue of energy transition, I'm appreciative of the opportunity to speak on this as it becomes even more important in a Guyana context. Next slide. That's our beautiful flag. You can, next slide, yes. Guyana's really gained international recognition with the significant oil discoveries over the past 5 to 6 years. I think it's about 24 to be exact, and 9 billion barrels of recoverable oil resources. And despite the COVID-19 pandemic, Guyana has seen unprecedented growth last year, 26.2%. I usually say there are countries that were hoping to get 2.6%, but Guyana was able to get 26.2%. Economic growth expectation by government is at 20.9%, while the IMF predicts a growth rate of 16.2%, making Guyana the fourth fastest growing economy in the world. And the expectation is Guyana will experience at least 13% growth over the next 4 years. The population size, you can see, is relatively small at 780,000 people. And the country is very blessed with many natural resources. You have gold, diamond, bauxite, pristine forests made up of unique species of flora and fauna. And the inflation rate, you can see, is just about 2%. The recent floods in Guyana would have spiked that a little bit, but the country is quite stable, and in terms of the economic growth and the projections that we are going to see in the next few years. Next slide. But this is the reality in Guyana as we speak. What we have seen in Guyana this year, the last couple of months, from May to be exact. We've seen unprecedented levels of rainfall where the tropical wave embedded with the intertropical convergence zone resulted in heavy rainfall during May. And this has continued into June and possibly last until mid-July. All regions of Guyana have been affected, especially our hinterland areas. And this is the kind of floodwaters that we have been seeing over the last couple of weeks and months. And we have about over 28,000 households have reportedly been impacted by the current flood, and water entering homes. Livestock has been lost. Farms have been lost, and the farmlands have been inundated, resulting in crop damage. And for this reason and others, the impact of climate change for Guyana is very real, and it is very important that it is discussed. Next slide. From a policy perspective, Guyana is a low-lying coastal state, which has always been a strong advocate for adaptation and mitigation efforts to limit the impact of climate change. We have seen in Guyana, successive governments have championed causes and supported measures to limit and to reverse the impact of climate change. And in this, the UK has found a very strong partner in Guyana, as the UK provides real global climate leadership about stopping climate change and reversing some of its impact. And so in terms of the policy framework, this current government has what is called the Low Carbon Development Strategy. It was first developed and launched in 2009, revised in 2013, and is currently being further revised since this government came into office in August of last year. The model that they are using is one that seeks to deliver greater economic and social development through a low carbon pathway. Those are the main, and you can see the two broad goals of the LCDS, as it is called. Next slide. On the energy sector in Guyana, in a World Bank study on electricity supply and demand of Latin America and the Caribbean, it was stated that under modest GDP growth assumptions, the demand for electricity in Latin America and the Caribbean would more than double by 2030. Under current expansion plans, the region would need to add more than 239 gigawatts of new power generation capacity to meet the demand. A higher growth rate or a higher demand for electricity would require even more new capacity. And if we are using that assumption for Guyana, currently the fourth fastest growing economy in the world, the energy expansion will be great. And recent studies have shown that Guyana's energy needs should double by 2030 as oil and gas continues to expand, the manufacturing sector, and other sectors such as tourism and housing, as they also continue to expand, the energy needs will expand. You can see currently Guyana has one of the highest electricity rates in the Caribbean, and this has really impacted the manufacturing sector, which accounts for just about 7% of GDP. And looking at the energy mix, we can see that it is mainly fossil fuel based. It makes up about 91 to 92%, while renewables, including biomass, solar, and wind, make up about 8 to 9%. And this really shows that there is scope for renewable energy expansion as the Guyana economy continues or looks to expand. Next slide. A closer look at the renewable energy status shows Guyana has some targets, including 100% renewable energy generation by 2040 and doubling the rate of energy efficiency by 2030. As a member of CARICOM, which is the Caribbean Community, the customs union which Guyana is a part of, Guyana has set targets of 20% renewable power generation by 2017, 28% by 2022, and 47% by 2027. Currently, Guyana is at that 8 to 9% range, and therefore there is need to significantly ramp up activities to achieve these targets. We have seen the government, the previous administration, and it's continuing to some extent in the current administration, in the new government, that they have sought to renewables, solar has been the focus, and they're looking at having public buildings use solar energy. All public buildings use solar energy by 2025. Next slide. Looking again at the existing policy and regulatory framework, we can see that some gaps do exist. Government does provide incentives, including you have tax reductions or exemptions for the sector. But the main issue that we have here in Guyana is the need for legal and regulatory reform to address some of those same gaps that exist. And I will show you more of this in the next slide. Next slide, please. In the energy sector, again, the oversight and management is somewhat complex. So we have here the Guyana Energy Agency, which deals with renewable energy, which is an agency of the Ministry of Public Works that is responsible for energy. Then there is also the Guyana Geology and Mines Commission, which has a petroleum unit. There's a Ministry of Natural Resources that covers all natural resources, and the Guyana Power and Light that deals with power generation and distribution. And I think for that reason, there is need for reform, and this is what the current government is addressing. And they're trying to, I think, before the end of the year, we should see a Petroleum Act, which will also see the establishment of a Petroleum Commission, which will try to harmonize and to remove the siloism and the piecemeal approach to the energy sector here in Guyana. So before the end of the year, or by the end of the year, we're hoping to see the Petroleum Act come into place and the Petroleum Commission, which should address some of the issues within the government, and how it administers this sector. Next slide. From a budgetary point of view, these are the budgetary allocations for 2021. We have already seen some tenders have been put out for the small hydro and solar projects, and we're expecting to see more of them. A significant amount of the project and program funding is coming from international partners, international banks, and these include the Caribbean Development Bank. There's also the Islamic Development Bank, the World Bank, and the Inter-American Development Bank. Those are the main partners in Guyana as it relates to this sector. There's also the Green Climate Fund that is also providing support for the renewables sector, and we should see some projects coming on stream from them also. And so this sector should be considered attractive for UK companies because the funding stream is very predictable. Next slide. And this is a quote from His Excellency Dr. Mohammed Irfan Ali. He said, I quote, "We are seeking investors to develop a mix of energy projects in order to generate an additional 400 megawatts of installed capacity. We shall be installing a natural gas plant, pursuing hinterland electrification, including through the provision of mini grids for large hinterland communities. The Mila Falls hydroelectricity project will recommence. Guyana looks forward to partnering with the private sector, including foreign investors, in these and other energy projects." So in terms of the, end quote, in terms of the energy sector, this is the direction that the government of Guyana is seeking to take, developing an energy mix to generate an additional 400 megawatts of installed capacity which I will go into what that energy mix looks like in my next slide. Next slide, Stacey. And here it is. In terms of the energy priorities and the opportunities, there is hydropower, so it's 4 areas, 4 to 5, you can say, because we have seen waste energy really pick up in Guyana and several projects being put forward. But the main areas that the government had identified has identified are hydro, solar, wind, and biomass. In terms of hydropower, as the president had stated in that statement from the president, the Amila Falls hydro project, which is being considered, is back on the table, and they're looking at public-private partnership for this project. On the hydro side, there are also 6 small hydro initiatives generating from 20 kilowatts to 2,000 kilowatts being constructed, and there are about 7 hydropower initiatives that are in the assessment phase. If you know a little bit of the Guyana's geography, the hinterland, very heavily forested, and our hinterland, far-flung communities in the hinterland region. And so there is the hinterland electrification program to replace and to upgrade photovoltaic systems in the hinterland areas and to advance the mini grid that the president spoke about for the large hinterland areas. In terms of wind, there's currently 1 large project being looked at. The environmental impact assessment has just been completed for the construction and operation of the first large-scale wind farm in Guyana along the coast. And they're hoping to have about 6 wind turbines, each at about 4.2 megawatts capacity. And this would be, the hope is to generate about 25.2% megawatts wind farm capacity. On the biomass and the waste to energy side, we have seen the Guyana Office for Investment has received several projects of this nature. And again, this is another interesting area for Guyana in terms of waste to energy and the use of technology. And all of this is being used, will be done. All of these projects, these 4 areas, the renewables, energy space, will be used to supplement the government's gas to shore project. You may have heard about it yesterday, but there is that major gas to shore project that is high on the government's agenda, aimed at generating an additional 150 megawatts of power. And that project is likely to come on stream in 2024. I think the capex for that project is about $900 million US dollars. So the government sees the renewable energy space supplementing its energy needs at this point in time as it continues to move towards 100% renewables. Next slide. And so just a little bit in terms of DIT and our support in the Caribbean. We have 4 main offices in Barbados, and my colleague in Barbados, she covers the Eastern Caribbean. We have Guyana, and from Guyana we also cover Suriname. There's also Jamaica and colleagues in Trinidad and Tobago. We also have resident British commissioners, high commissioners in St. Lucia, Grenada, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and Dominica, and micro missions in, you can call it micro missions in Bahamas and Belize. But even though we are small teams, we are always willing and to support and very keen on seeing business grow, UK business grow in the Caribbean. Next slide. And so in terms of DIT support and DIT help, how we can help you, DIT has 4 main aims in the Caribbean. First one being trade support. We we support UK companies looking to do business in our various patches in Guyana. For example, in terms of trade support, we can help you to access buyers, the government, and the private sector, and the supply chain. We can help you in terms of doing research, in terms of trade promotion activities, being part of webinars such as this, sharing information and helping companies to better understand the market and how things work in Guyana. There's also investment support similar to our trade support activities. And we are also focused on opening markets, which aim at increasing trade and trade liberalization. So if a barrier or regulation exists in the market, we help to tackle those. And next slide. These are the two wonderful people you'll meet if you get in touch with us at DIT Guyana. Myself and my colleague Kimberly, we're here to assist you. And I can say in closing, the next slide, Stacey. In closing, I can say there is no better time than now to look at Guyana in terms of the growth that is expected to happen, and not just what is expected to happen, what is already happening in country. The renewable energy space is gradually going to increase and grow. I can say that because government, of course, it's a new government, well, relatively new. They've been in office for about 9 months now. They're still working in terms of identifying projects that will go with its low carbon development strategy. They're also working on that gas to shore project, but they're also looking at how to supplement their energy needs, and that is why there is that focus on the energy mix. And so I would encourage companies to start looking at Guyana, getting in touch with us, and see how we can assist you in getting a better understanding of the country, how things work here, and to explore the opportunities that exist. Thank you very much. I hope I kept within the time, Greg.
You're 1 minute early, Sherwin, even better. I taught you well. Thank you very much, Sherwin, for that. That's a really good overview of both some of the challenges which obviously exist in terms of the impact of climate change, but also the opportunities. And on the challenges, one of the first things when I first arrived in Guyana in 2015 that really made me think about this was I was standing in my garden and I was 6 feet below sea level, standing in my garden. And that's something which does sort of bring home to you how vulnerable many of the Caribbean countries, but especially Guyana, actually are. Now, our next speaker is Richard Rambaran, who's the Executive Director of the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Richard is an old friend of mine from my time in Guyana. The Chamber is and Richard, I know you won't say this to anybody else or any of the other organizations. I think the Chamber is potentially the most influential business organization in Guyana. So having bigged you up with that, Richard, I'm now over to you to deliver the goods. Thanks, Richard.
So thank you very much, Greg. High Commissioner, Ambassador, MBE, and all of the other accolades that you've been able to amass over the years. It's certainly a pleasure to hear you once again and to see you, colleagues, Sherwin, Stacey, all of you here on. Welcome, of course, to my presentation, and thank you all for inviting me to this and being able giving me the opportunity actually to be able to present on behalf of the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Are we all seeing my screen? Stacey, can you perhaps just indicate for me?
I've just stopped sharing, so if you want to maybe stop and try again, it should come up.
Sure.
I got it there, Stacey.
Oh, you did? Okay, well.
Yeah, it came through.
Okay. Now it definitely will.
There it is.
Is it there now?
It is, yes.
Yes, it is.
Okay,
it is,
fantastic.
Richard. Yes.
All right. Thank you all very much. All right. So still seeing?
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
So I'll
Yes.
proceed with this.
Yes.
So my name is Richard Rambaran. I'm the Executive Director of the Chamber of Commerce here in Guyana. It's the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce and Industry, but actually we are given legislative mandate for Guyana and the chambers of commerce across the country. I'll get into that a bit here. So in this very brief presentation, which I'm going to make, I'm going to go through some facts about the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce and Industry, a little bit about our work in the oil and gas sector and what we've been actually doing to promote trade here in Guyana, and then also how you, as somebody who perhaps is not in Guyana, but you're interested in Guyana, can be involved or can utilize the platform of the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce and Industry to be either present in Guyana or with the purpose of establishing here in Guyana. So the Chamber of Commerce is the oldest private sector umbrella organization in Guyana, and interestingly, one of the oldest also in the Caribbean, been established since 1889. And it's the second oldest chamber in the region, second to the Barbados Chamber of Commerce and Industry, which is perhaps about 1830 or 1840 odd. So at the time when I did this presentation first, or created this presentation, we were approximately about 400 members. And since then, this is to tell the rapid pace that we're moving at because of the interest of the work that we do. We've now moved up to almost 450 members. Now, in a large country, that's small, but in a small country like Guyana, that's a pretty sizable portion of the organized private sector. So we have the way that our organization is structured is that we cater for all sectors, we cater for all sizes of enterprises. And as I would have mentioned earlier, we're actually legislatively mandated by the laws of Guyana. So there's actually an act that establishes the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce and Industry. It's an act of 1889, revised in the 1970s, and it's chapter 8903 of the laws of Guyana. But whilst we're established by an act of parliament, or there is legislative architecture that caters for Guyana, for the Chamber of Commerce, we're actually private sector organized, fully private sector funded, and perhaps as opposed to the chambers of commerce that are in the Francophone regions, we are not a part of government or do not execute government policies or play a role in government administration. That being said, however, we do have some statutory functions that we undertake as a result of our legislative mandate. These include, of course, representation on behalf of the business community, reviewing laws, reviewing policies, commenting extensively, if you will, on any piece of legislation or government policy that will affect, that will affect the private sector. So not atypical or not dissimilar to the private sector umbrella organizations that one would know from the Anglophonic model or those that would be present in the British system. We have, of course, over the years faced some changes in the structure and membership of the Chamber of Commerce. And of course, this is concomitant with the development of the Guyanese economy and what has been happening in the private sector. So a bit of an understanding of how our membership is outlaid. Distribution actually takes up a great portion of our membership, and this is second in second place to this is the oil and gas sector, then manufacturing, services, and then education and IT. But what this does, this gives you a very good idea or overview of what is presently happening in the private sector in Guyana, because I'll tell you, perhaps a couple of years ago, maybe say pre-2015, you would have had companies such as maybe say insurance, shipping, security, agriculture, mining. Those would have been the dominant groups in Guyana. But this is demonstrative of the changing architecture that we're seeing here in the private sector, and it shows in a tacit way where exactly the opportunities lie. So these numbers have actually shot up from years before the discovery of the oil and gas sector. Understanding our membership a little bit, we're actually pretty evenly balanced in certain regards. Large companies, companies that do over 500 million Guyana dollars in turnover, which within, of course, the international context, it's not large, but within a Guyanese private sector context, that's a pretty sizable amount. That comprises 25%. Our SMEs actually comprise the remainder of that portion, which is about 75%. So we have roughly that 80-20 rule being seen here, the Pareto principle. But most importantly, and perhaps very relevant for this grouping, is that component that is called non-resident membership. So for those persons who are actually interested in becoming members of the Chamber of Commerce, but they don't have an establishment yet in Guyana, or perhaps they're interested in what is happening in the country in the private sector, but they don't have an enterprise incorporated, they don't have a presence, but they are an organized enterprise in another country. We do cater for those members, and that is classified as a non-resident member. All the voting right, all of the privileges are the same as a member of the Chamber of Commerce, but the only difference is that a non-resident member is not eligible to vote at our annual general meeting. Of course, with technology, now the number of physical meetings that are occurring has greatly diminished. We, of course, have taken our own moves towards ensuring safety of persons. And essentially now, even non-resident members can be as participatory in meetings because they are all virtual, as opposed to perhaps previously. So we essentially act as a hub for information, and this is why many of the enterprises find this to be a very instrumental component in their data gathering and perhaps conducting market research and having access to information before that information is made public. Because as I would have mentioned, we do have the mandate to comment on draft policies, bills, etc. by government. So those are actually provided to us before they become, before they go through Parliament, before they actually become policy. And therefore it gives an investor a one-up, or it gives somebody a one-up on another person who may not have access to that, because they're able to make decisions much quicker. Now, whilst this component presently only comprises 4% or about now 6% of our membership, it has grown from absolutely zero over the past few years to this number. So it remains a growing number. We do receive about an application every month from a non-resident member, and they do find it, the feedback is very positive. So I just wanted to mention a little bit about the relevant components of the Guyanese economy. I mean, I won't go tremendously in depth on this because, of course, you have been, I'm sure, regaled with a number of these types of presentations over the past few years. But of course, we have been transitioning from a low-income economy to an upper middle income economy. And what this essentially does is that it provides a space for those persons who are in the financial sector and who are perhaps providers of capital and those private investors. Because essentially this means that the government has to begin to move away from traditional sources of financing into more innovative sources of financing as they move out of that concessional parameter. For this reason, it has been touted a fair bit that private-public partnership will be the order of the future. The government, of course, will naturally be looking to diversify their sources of capital and the sources of financing in the future. And this, like I would have mentioned, presents a tremendous opportunity. What it also does is it creates the environment that will foster more efficiency of capital utilization. So essentially enterprises being able to utilize or being forced to utilize capital in a much more efficient manner. Why? Fundamentally because this is being provided to them at a market rate, whereas before in the construct of national banks, etc., it would have been aligned with development priorities. But as the economy grows and becomes more market-oriented and a more mature capitalist economy, you find that we're tending more towards a market-oriented society, which is, of course, significantly different from what we've seen in the years gone by. Overall, the economic growth outside of the oil and gas sector remains positive, barring perhaps the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, and the inflation rate, etc., remains low. Why I included this government spending and private spending is to show that the private sector in Guyana is actually beginning to take up much more of the spending in the economy. And this is just up to 2017, but as you explore the numbers even further, the uptake begins to increase more. And this compounded by the positive signals that are being sent by the current administration, and the fact that they have talked up private sector growth and private sector development actually creates a great amount of space for private investors. However, naturally, as you can imagine, there is tremendous interest in the country at this time. And therefore, investors who are coming to Guyana, those who are serious about investing and those who really want to establish a presence in Guyana, ought to perhaps come with a very, very frankly, a good plan, a good idea, and I can almost guarantee that there will be support being offered for projects that are developmental in nature and do offer broader or wider economic benefits. Of course, a country like Guyana, starting from a low-income base, provides many opportunities for persons who are coming. So just a bit before, as I begin to move into the end of this very brief presentation, what exactly have we been doing at the Chamber of Commerce to facilitate this? So, of course, you have been provided with what is happening within the context of the local content policy. And we are, of course, redrafting our current local content policy with a view towards legislation. And the Chamber of Commerce has been a leading advocate for the local content policy in Guyana. So those persons who, of course, are not here but wish to have input, this is certainly one way that input can be provided through a stakeholder. What we envision is a legislation that, of course, promotes Guyanese businesses and gives first consideration to Guyanese businesses. But with that being said, the Chamber has always taken a position that encourages joint ventureships, that encourages partnerships, that encourages collaboration in and around any projects which are being undertaken. And it's for this reason that we have fielded multiple trade missions, both outbound as well as inward to Guyana. And as a result, we have actually had in excess of 24 successful joint ventureships or partnerships as a result of. So we continue to foster and to promote private sector development and partnerships for our member companies. And as I would have mentioned earlier, we see the range or the span of our membership. Just in closing, how can one actually become involved with us? So the non-resident membership, as I would have mentioned, is a good way. All applications at this time are digital, completely digital, and they can be found very easily by visiting gcci.gy. That's our website, where you can keep up to date with what we're doing by subscribing to our newsletter, or you can become a non-resident member. The application is fully digital. Keep in mind our local conferences as well as our trade missions, and of course subscribing either to our newsletter or becoming a non-resident member keeps you attuned to what we're doing. This gives tremendous opportunity to interact with the membership here locally. Participating in our virtual mixes, we have been hosting a few virtual mixes to great success. We have kept one recently with the Caribbean Council, for those who perhaps are familiar with the Caribbean Council operating out of the UK. That event yielded tremendous success, and certainly perhaps Stacey and Brett, we can look at doing something in the near future in this regard for the participants. And then working through our secretariat by contacting me. Essentially, you can contact, once you visit the website, you have that information there. Sorry, for some reason it's not showing, but you can visit our website. We do have all the information there. And once you send an email, an interest, we will get back to you. We are in Guyana from the Chamber of Commerce organizing one of the first energy conferences to be held in country. More information on this is available via our website. It's the Guyana Energy Conference. Of course, at this time, we're set tentatively for September, though we may be reviewing that in the near future. But of course, as I would have mentioned, stay tuned to the website, subscribe to our newsletters. Please feel free to contact us should you require any help or any facilitation on your investment or inquiries regarding Guyana, or if you're seeking partners, or if you're at the very basic level looking to do some market research on particular sectors. So I'll offer those as a very brief overview of some of the work that we have been undertaking regarding external relations. And of course, Stacey, as I promised you, very cognizant of the time constraints. I'm not sure if perhaps there's time for any questions or so. So I'll offer those.
Thank Richard. We'll thank you, Richard. We'll do the questions at the end. I think you were desperate to get me to be the bad cop there. I think a little bit, just pushing your timing, but we'll do the questions at the end, Richard. And there's a couple have come through, which we'll run through then. Now, next we have Nick Dagu, another old friend of mine. In fact, I remember well his wedding a few years ago. Nick is the immediate past president of the Georgetown Chamber and also the immediate past chairman of the Private Sector Commission, notably the youngest person to ever hold both of those roles at the same time. His family business, works in a wide range of areas in Guyana, including hardware, fast food, and now, as it shows on the slide, they have the Guyana Oil and Gas Support Services, which is designed to increase local content and local people to benefit from the oil and gas business. Nick, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Well, let me first congratulate Brett and the Granite PR team for a well-organized event. Greg, it's great to see you again, even though virtually, and congratulations on the award, the Order of the British Empire. It's great to be in the company of such great fellow speakers, and it's an exciting time for Guyana. But I want to first start with talking about 2017. And 2017 was a watershed moment for Guyana. ExxonMobil took its final investment decision for the Liza field in June of 2017. And in December of 2017, I founded Guyana Oil and Gas Support Services. Now, it cannot go without saying that Exxon's decision to invest its capital in Guyana and to work with the government of Guyana meant that many new startups, not just mine, had to be born in order to build the necessary capacity for this industry that was being birthed. Now, fast forward a few years, and companies like mine, Guyana Oil and Gas Support Services, are working with the likes of Halliburton, Saipem, Schlumberger, SBM, and Technip FMC, continually developing local content. Of course, guided by Guyana's current local content policy. On account of these moves, for instance, my company will be doing the first subsea fabrication in country in conjunction with some, let's say, facilitation and training from our partners in Trinidad and Tobago. 3 years ago, when we first founded this company and we set this as our desire, we were told that we were mad that we wouldn't weld anything in country. But now, here we are 3 years later, and we have trained and certified personnel, an excellent HSSC record, and we are increasing local content in the industry. And again, I want to caveat that being very upfront that yes, I'm shamelessly plugging my company, but I'm not the only one. There are many others, and you can see from Richard's presentation that the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce and Industry's fastest growing segment was the oil and gas segment. So my point in all of this is that there are a number of Guyanese companies who are growing out there who will make excellent partners for UK-based and European-based companies who are looking for an entry point into Guyana. Given the expected local content law that is coming and the push for further local content, I encourage the audience here and those who may view, let's say, this as a recording in the future, to consider the path of joint ventures, partnerships, co-investment to continually grow the local content in Guyana. Because while we are naturally growing to a certain extent, there is a need for more. We need more investment. We need more technology transfer. We need more skills training. And so we desperately need to interact with larger, more experienced companies in the external world so that we can grow further. To that, COVID-19 did play a part in forcing such a ramp up of local content, as a lot of the larger companies were not able to move people across borders with ease as they did pre-pandemic. But the pandemic also brought some challenges. You had wild swings in oil prices and companies slashing spending. But I'm happy to report that the world's newest oil producer survived it relatively unscathed. And now, with vaccine rollout across countries, and including ours, where Guyana is pretty much, I think about 40% of our adult population has been at least 2 doses, I think, of the vaccine. You can see light at the end of the tunnel for the pandemic. And you can expect that the only place for us to go is up, both for foreign direct investors as well as for these local startups in the industry. Now, for the future, which is the common thread amongst the topics today, there are a huge number of opportunities in Guyana across the supply chain for the oil and gas industry. Exxon is still ramping up exploration activities in the neighboring blocks, not just the Stabroek block, but the neighboring blocks. And when you couple this along with their 4 sanctioned developments and a possible 4 more, it provides ample opportunities to supply their tier one contractors. Tier one contractors such as Edison Suez, who are providing platforms to fly vessels, the Guyana Shore-Based Initiative, or GISB, who are providing shore-based services, Nabi KCL, who are building Exxon's local office building and campus, Halliburton, Schlumberger, and Baker Hughes, who are providing drilling fluids and completion solutions to Exxon and its exploration and production activities, SBM, who are building and operating the floating production storage and offloading vessels, FPSOs, Technip FMC, who are building and installing the wellheads, and Saipem, who are constructing and installing risers and flow lines. All of these companies need support in areas such as inspection and certification, construction and project management, health, safety, security, and environment solutions, training, accommodation for expatriate workers, and a range of other products and services. I would encourage everyone listening here today to get in touch with the Guyanese High Commission in the United Kingdom, as well as the UK High Commission in Guyana, to find out more about the market, as well as think about joining business service organizations such as the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce and Industry. It would be remiss of you not to look into one of the fastest growing countries in the world, even during the COVID-19 pandemic, and one which is expected by the end of this decade to be producing 1 million barrels of oil per day. In closing, for those in the mechanical and electrical engineering fields, again, I'll do my shameless plug and pitch the services that I provide as Guyana Oil and Gas Support Services, where we do welding and fabrication, project management, small tools and consumables, and maintenance services for oil and gas clients. We've taken on projects, for instance, we've installed the piping electrical systems for Halliburton's largest mud plant in this region. And through our joint venture, again, we will be doing the first jumper fabrication in Guyana. Check us out on the web at guyanaservice.com or LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out to me directly on LinkedIn. But I want to leave it with, I am not the only such company that is growing quickly in this industry. Whatever business line you have or do in the UK, I encourage you to look at business service organizations like the Chamber of Commerce, where you will see Guyanese companies who are either startups or existing and want to either expand their product and service lines or create new product and service lines, and will make great partners for UK businesses who want to connect and grow in Guyana. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Nick. Now, without further ado, we'll go on to Dr. Jonathan Wills. Now, Dr. Wills is from my second favourite part of Scotland. I regret to tell him that my favourite part of Scotland is the Urge Hebrides, so Bran will like me for that. But Jonathan is obviously based up in Shetland, who have a very interesting and very good story to tell, I think, from oil and gas. Jonathan is a private scholar and an author, a previous councillor from the Shetland Islands, as well as being an environmental consultant and a journalist specialising in shipping, aviation and environmental topics. Jonathan, the floor is all yours.
Thanks, Greg. Can you hear me okay? Everybody?
Yes.
Can you hear
Yes.
me? Good. Yeah, and I'm also supposed to be retired, but I keep getting tempted out of retirement. Look, probably the last thing Guyana needs just now is some old retired guy from Shetland telling them how to do stuff. However, over the past 50 years, I'm astonished to see, 50 years, at first as a journalist for 2 decades and a bit, and latterly, as you say, an environmental consultant and elected councillor, I've had a fairly close-up view of the oil and gas industry in the North Sea, in Alaska, the Russian Far East, and more recently, West Africa. So I have some cautionary tales, financial and environmental, that may be of interest, and I hope you don't find my contribution too negative. But it's not all joy. Firstly, the money. Congratulations, Guyana, on discovering those huge oil reserves of Middle Eastern proportions. You got lucky. A bit late in the day, admittedly, because everyone's now talking about phasing out fossil fuels, but still lucky, because the fact is that oil and gas are going to be needed for at least the next 50 years, whatever the G7 tell us, and those reserves belong to the people of Guyana. The reason the oil and gas companies have to pay for exploration and development licenses is that they don't own the oil and gas. The people do. A lot of people forget that. So what the people's government says goes, or it ought to. Now, the prices paid for licenses and the taxes levied on production are always politically controversial, and Guyana's recent arguments are quite normal. Across the water in Senegal, where I was a couple of years ago, there have been even more, let's just say, differences of opinion. The Shetland experience is that if you don't nail down a really good deal firmly on day one, then almost as soon as the documents are signed, the oil companies will start trying to tweak the agreements in their favour. A glitch over a land rental in Shetland took us over a decade to resolve, for example. It cost a lot of money. Now, when, not if, there's a big oil spill, you can be sure that compensation for pollution will be grudging, slow, and inadequate. That's normal. For example, after the Amoco Cadiz spill in Brittany in 1978, it took the victims 14 years in the American courts to get a fraction of the money that they claimed. Oh, and another 4 years in the French courts to stop their lawyers taking too big a share. Following the Exxon Valdez grounding in Alaska, it took so long to settle the claims that many claimants died before they got compensation. An Anchorage attorney told me in 1989, "There are lawyers not yet born who will work on this case." I thought he was joking. He wasn't. The 1993 Brer tanker spill claims in Shetland took several years to settle, and some damage was never paid. The International Oil Pollution Compensation Fund doesn't have anything like enough cash for a really big spill, and it actually prides itself on only paying out on 60% of claims on average. The fund's money comes from governments, not from the oil companies, all of these companies, remember, have limited liability, and none of them have comprehensive insurance for all the potential damage their activities may cause. Just think about that for a minute. Whenever there's a conflict of interest, the industry will have teams of lawyers and accountants working shifts around the clock to counter the people's elected representatives, environmental campaigners, fishermen's leaders, tourism operators, and NGO staff, all of whom will probably be exhausted, and some will suffer activist burnout, as well as squabbling between themselves, of course. In Shetland, 45 years ago, we should have demanded absolute guarantees of prompt and full compensation for pollution, as well as cast iron commitments on land rents and local royalty payments. We should have had all that in writing before we allowed any oil into the pipelines and tankers, and we didn't. As a result, we got a lot less money than we expected. The land rent, for example, of the oil terminal is now about 1/10 of its true market value after the industry threatened to walk away from the islands. Our elected councillors back in the mid-90s didn't dare call their bluff. And in total, Shetland's much vaunted local petroleum revenues have amounted to a tiny fraction of 1% of the market value of the oil and gas shipped through the port of Sulemvo since October 1978. Well, I'm sure you'll do better than that, Guyana. I hope so. Still, the relatively small income that Shetland Islands Council did receive from oil and gas enabled us to set up 2 permanent funds, one for economic development and the other for charitable purposes, and to build a miniature Scandinavian welfare state, superior in some ways to the system in the UK nationally, where, of course, successive London governments spent the oil and gas revenues on other things. Unlike Norway, and to some extent Alaska, where they established sovereign wealth funds that generated lasting revenues for public services and vital support to small and medium-sized enterprises in particular. So here endeth the first lesson. Get the money right, get it in writing, and make sure your lawyers are as smart as theirs. Now, there's a famous clip, newsreel clip, of President Nixon approving the Trans-Alaska Pipeline Act. And just before he signs it into law, he turns to an aide, smirks in that smirky way he had, and says, "No environmental problems, right?" As we say in Scotland, aye, right. As I understand it, in Guyana, there'll be a gas pipeline, but no oil pipelines to shore or overland, and no big tanker harbour to export Guyana's oil. Correct me now if I'm wrong. But that removes two sources of environmental risk. All the oil, as I am told, will be loaded direct to tankers offshore from floating production, storage and offloading vessels, flopsies we call them for short. Well, that's how they'd have preferred to do it offshore Shetland in the 1970s, but remotely controlled seabed wells were then still in the early stages of development, as was the offshore loading equipment, and submarine pipe laying was extremely expensive. So the companies had no real alternative to pumping the oil to the nearest land, Shetland, and loading the tankers in a safe harbour. So they had to do a deal. We had them over a barrel, if you'll pardon the expression, or so we thought. Now, although the technology is now extremely clever and very reliable, offshore loading does not remove the risks of pollution. Obviously, manoeuvring very large tankers very close to very large floating storage vessels in the open sea is inherently dangerous. Collisions and leaks from flexible hoses are possible. There's also a risk of fire and explosion. And there's less room on board a flopsy than at a land-based terminal for cleaning the oily water, which is produced by all oil wells, before discharging it to the ocean. So there's a risk of chronic, low-level pollution. And if there's a blowout on the seabed, well, we all know how long it took to stop the Macondo leak, and that Taylor well in the Gulf of Mexico is still leaking. The trade winds, I'm afraid, will bring any pollution to Guyana's shore in a few days. The prevailing wind has already despoiled many beaches with plastic litter, and I don't need to tell you that the coastal ecosystem of Guyana is vulnerable to oil pollution. You've read Exxon's environmental impact statement, and it's comprehensive. All coastlines are always damaged by spills, whether acute or chronic. Now, is pollution inevitable? I'm afraid the answer is yes, but can the risk be reduced? The answer is also yes, but how? A few years ago, I was tempted out of retirement to write a paper for the US National Academies of Science about what lay behind various spills and oil-related catastrophes. After every disaster, there's always an inquiry which recommends improvements, some of them so obvious that you wonder why no one thought of them before. But the common factor in all the fatal and polluting incidents I looked at was this: if people had followed national and international regulations, industry best practice, and their own employers' safety and operations manuals, all of which existed before the incident occurred, then it either wouldn't have happened or it would have had less severe consequences. This conclusion was equally valid whether the cause was a navigational error, for example, the Torrey Canyon and the Exxon Valdez tanker wrecks, or a mechanical breakdown, as in the Amoco Cadiz and Brer tanker groundings, or a departure from approved operating and safety procedures, Piper Alpha and Macondo, or a design fault in a modification, the Chinook and perhaps Super Puma helicopter crashes were examples of that. If things had been done as they were supposed to be done, oil industry workers wouldn't have died and seabirds wouldn't have drowned in oil. And often, all too often, fatal shortcuts were driven by the desire to cut costs. So, how do you make people do what they're paid to do, or enable them to do what they're paid to do? Through self-regulation and reporting by corporations whose main priority, quite understandably and respectably, is making a profit. Or do you do it with a properly trained, motivated and funded team of inspectors who work for the public only and really are independent? With oil tankers, after many rust bucket incidents in the 1970s and 80s, we now have port state jurisdiction, so the government in whose territorial waters a ship is sailing can insist on an inspection and can detain her until faults are fixed. We also have much better international standards of training, certification of watchkeeping for ships' officers and crews. There's some self-certification at sea, but the onus is on national governments to keep track of where ships are, what condition they're in, and whether their crews are up to scratch. And that saves a lot of problems. Now, unannounced or short notice inspections are easy enough to arrange when a tanker's in harbour. But who is going to arrive out of the blue for a surprise inspection of offshore oil and gas platforms or a flopsy? No one, that's who. To do that, a national government needs its own helicopters, and that costs money, and it would irritate the oil and gas companies, who obviously and understandably prefer self-certification and carefully staged pre-announced inspections. But if we don't do surprise inspections, then what goes on over the horizon in Guyana or the Shetland Islands is literally out of sight and out of mind. This is why, one day in 2016, no one on shore knew that BP's Clare oil production platform had spilled 90 tonnes of oil in its overboard water discharge, until BP chose to tell the UK government agencies and the Shetland Council about it. It turned out that the company was only sampling the oil content of the water discharge every 12 hours, once every 12 hours. In between shift changes, anything could happen. That's still the normal situation on almost every fixed or floating offshore installation in the world, and no one seems to be doing anything about it. Perhaps Guyana will. There is a gleam of hope, thanks to vessel tracking apps, the internet, and an ever-increasing body of concerned, indignant, and determined mobile phone users. What ends up on the beaches these days is also very likely to end up in the news media. And that really does scare the oil and gas company executives. They can usually handle governments. They can't always schmooze their way out of bad publicity. It's a powerful incentive to good behaviour. For example, a group of us in Shetland, using nothing more threatening than Facebook posts, recently persuaded ship managers to stop sailing laden tankers too close to our coastline for comfort, and to stop parking offshore loading shuttle tankers within 5 miles of 2 major nature reserves. You won't believe the reason for their bad behaviour. It was so that the tanker crews could get a better Wi-Fi signal to watch Netflix while they waited for their next cargo. This was officially denied, but it's true. Anyway, if you'd like to see some pictures about what I've been talking about, I've left a PowerPoint with Stacey, who'll be happy to share it. And thank you for listening. And good luck, Guyana, because you're going to need it.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. It is obviously be useful to hear the different perspective and the slightly more realistic, some would say, perspective. On that note, I'm having a few issues with my Wi-Fi, so apologies if I'm sounding a bit strange. I'm actually now moved on to my phone. But I'd like to hand the floor over to the Right Honourable Brian Wilson. Brian is a former Labour politician and held 5 ministerial posts, including as UK Trade Minister and UK Energy Minister in the government of Prime Minister Blair. Subsequently, he has retained a very close interest in trade and energy issues and writes exclusively about them. Since leaving politics in 2005, Brian has worked for successive governments on trade policy and also in the private sector. Named UK Global Director of the Year by the Institute of Directors in 2012, member of the Privy Council since 2001, and a commander of the British Empire, so technically my superior in this respect as well, in 2020 for services to business and charity in his native Scotland. Brian, the floor is...
You're still on mute, Brian.
I'm just, how am I now? Yeah. Greg, thanks for that introduction. I come off the back of a lot of what Jonathan said, should be listened to very carefully. And we've also heard an immense amount of expertise about the specifics of Guyana. So I should say first that my own interest and perspective are maybe more general and remote. Quite simply, they arise from an ongoing interest in fragile economies and the effects that the quite sudden advent of oil wealth can have upon them, for good or ill. I'm actually speaking to you from the Outer Hebrides of Scotland. I know a little about fragile economies and environments, and in that spirit, first, I'd like to extend sympathy to those in Guyana who are now facing the realities of flooding. Now, listening yesterday to Bobby Gossels and also today's excellent speakers from Guyana, maybe I gained just a slightly better understanding of how colossal the scale of Guyana's opportunity really is. And I doubt there's ever been such a dichotomy between the scale of resource and the size of population. And that means the gap between getting it right and getting it wrong is even wider than just about anywhere else. And I'm sure the interest of everyone on this call is to ensure that any support needed, any advice needed to get it right is available to Guyana, not just for the short term, but for the generations who follow. Now, long before I was a minister, rather like Jonathan, my own interest in these issues started with how the UK, and particularly the north and northeast of Scotland, handled their own early encounters with the oil industry half a century ago, in the early days of the North Sea, and then over subsequent decades. And in retrospect, and notwithstanding the real episodes that Jonathan cited, the report card is pretty favourable when viewed against what happened in many other parts of the world. But as in every part of the world, and as we sometimes found to our own heavy cost, effective regulation is the key to much else, economically, socially, environmentally, and critically in terms of offshore safety. I don't disagree with a word of what Jonathan said in all these respects. Independent regulation and enforcement are absolutely crucial to everything else, and do not underestimate the absolute nature of that reality. Oil did create prosperity here, but never swamped the rest of the economy. And it did create a supply chain, but only through the strong intervention of government to insist upon local content. And although there was no legislation to back this up, there were other ways to bring the power of government to bear. And very quickly, the North Sea went from 0 to 70% UK content, which was, at that time, a quite remarkable achievement. Now, not only did that create a huge level of employment within the UK, still more than 200,000 oil and gas jobs today, it also gave our companies the knowledge and the experience to go out into the world and export these commodities. So wherever there is offshore oil and gas, there are supply chain companies which gained their foothold in the industry through the North Sea. Comparisons are always imprecise, often dangerous, and the differences between Guyana and the North Sea are probably greater than the similarities. But if there are lessons to be learned, then they should be freely available to you. And that's why I think it's a great initiative by Aberdeen and Georgetown to have twinned as the basis for ongoing connections to the benefit of both. And I think what we heard earlier this morning, from Nico is about the opportunities, indeed the thirst for joint working, more than justifies the case for these connections and indeed this event. You'll hear a lot about the Shetland model. Jonathan obviously alluded to it, and it has its relevance, but again, comparisons have to be qualified with caveats. Shetland was and is a local authority, whereas Guyana is a sovereign state with its own powers to make laws and create its own fiscal regime. And in that respect, the comparison should be with other small states which have faced the same challenges and opportunities. However, the key point about Shetland was that it took the opportunity presented through by a supportive Labour government in the 1970s to put its own legislation through Westminster, which in effect gave it a royalty on the oil which passed through Shetland, creating a fund for the long term, which has been used to good effect on a vast range of projects, while the capital of the fund remains pretty much intact. And that's a good social model to follow. But again, it was within the very limited powers of a local authority in the UK. Comparisons with the Norwegian oil fund, on the other hand, might well be misleading. For starters, it wasn't until 30 years after oil started coming ashore that the Norwegians set up their fund, and the wealth which has since poured into it has come not so much from revenues in the North Sea, but from the global activities of the state oil company, Statoil, which the presence of oil in Norwegian waters gave rise to in the first place. It's a different history. It's extremely interesting history, but not necessarily directly relevant to where Guyana stands now. The common theme, however, is that oil wells should lay the foundations for the future as well as serving the needs of the present. And in Guyana, you don't have to look far for another disastrous model in which oil becomes a curse rather than a blessing, making a small minority wealthy while the problems of poverty remain unabated. and that at all costs is the model to avoid. Now, I firmly believe that the UK, both at government level and through our many excellent companies, can offer a positive contribution to what's evolving in Guyana, and I hope they'll be able to do so again, as Nicholas suggested. One of the dafter responses to the whole energy transition debate has been to withdraw UK and Scottish government support from companies trying to win work abroad. Yet all common sense says that if you do have companies with half a century of experience working under the most demanding regulatory standards and constantly improving their environmental footprint, then they should be encouraged and not discouraged from promoting their skills and wares to the world, including Guyana. It's also critical, it's also praiseworthy that Guyana is not putting all its energy eggs in the one basket. On the contrary, Guyana's own circumstances have put it well ahead of the game in terms of energy transition and ambitions. Indeed, what you're already doing in recognition of the need to balance oil with renewables is itself an example to every oil-producing country in the world. Personally, I've been trying to support George Irwin and Evolve with their plans, and I know how deeply committed George is to Guyana, so I hope that all of that comes to fruition. So all I can do today is offer goodwill and support to Guyana in the challenges and opportunities that it faces. Under both headings, they are mind-blowingly enormous. I very much hope you get them right and that Guyana turns into a model, as the North Sea has done, of how the discovery of oil can be a great economic blessing rather than an insidious and divisive social curse. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. And I think that that closing line of yours is particularly apt, and one which certainly all of us who are involved in or have been involved in Guyana are very keen to ensure that Guyana develops for the benefit of every single member and every single citizen, and not the few. Thank you to all of our presenters today who have talked about the opportunities, talked about the challenges, and also, as Brian has done, have talked about the experience which the UK has, and it's something which I've been talking about since day one of these events, which is the fact that Aberdeen and Scotland more generally has some hard lessons to pass on, and lessons which Guyana should avoid, as well as some positive lessons. And I think we should try and continue to do that as much as we can, including on the transition away from oil and gas, as will ultimately happen in Guyana. And if you now look at the coastline of Aberdeen, you now see the Vattenfall wind farm, one of the largest wind farms in Europe, and I think maybe one of the largest wind farms certainly off the coast of the UK. That brings to conclusion the speakers, and as Stacey's just put up, any questions, please pop them in the chat. I've got 2 questions so far, one of which I think, Brett, your question about can overseas companies join GCCI, I think the answer to that is yes. Is that correct, Richard?
Yes, Greg, absolutely. Members can, companies can join the GCCI in the what is called non-resident membership category. That is, you can find all the information on the website, and the application is fully digital. So no need to send any documentation in physically, etc. You can do it right from wherever you are located.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Richard. And then an earlier question from John Petchy at the EIC was, between DIT and the Georgetown Chamber, are you well placed to make introduction to the companies / buyers involved with energy projects in Guyana? Richard, do you want to answer that one?
Sure, no problem. Of course, I won't endeavor to answer on behalf of the DIT, though I can speculate that Sherwin will do a very able job doing so. The short answer is yes, that we are placed to do so. We are placed, of course, well placed to introduce persons to the members of the Chamber of Commerce. We do have, of course, vetted membership, where persons are, of course, you have to present your regulatory documents and so on to show that you're a registered business, you're registered to pay tax, etc. But of course, there is only a certain amount of guarantee that we can give. Of course, in commercial transactions and relations, there is still some amount of due diligence, but we are well placed to do so. Anyone who feels free or would like to do so, I'll pop my email in the chat box where you can drop me a line. So no problem.
Thank you very much, Richard. Sherwin, do you want to come in as well on that one?
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Greg, and thanks for the question. Yes, we are in a position to support UK companies, but there's one caveat to our support as it relates to energy. On the 31st of March this year, the UK government, Her Majesty's government, is no longer supporting fossil fuel companies or pursuits in that area. There are some exemptions, for example, in the area of decommissioning, energy transition, environmental standards. There are those exemptions in terms of our support, but definitely in the area of renewable energy, we are in a position to support companies. You can reach out to us, and we can, as I mentioned, in terms of our trade support activities, we can do introductions, we can do market research, put you in touch with both government and private sector organizations. We have a very good relationship with, a very close working relationship with the Georgian Chamber of Commerce, and Richard is a very good partners with us on several activities in that regard. So definitely, we are in a position to support companies in the energy area. But of course, it is limited when it comes to fossil fuels. But definitely in renewables, we are able to do that.
Thank you, Sherwin, and Richard put his email in the chat bar there. Are there any further questions from anyone? Going once, going twice, going 3 times. Excellent.
Yeah, I was interested.
Oh, Jonathan, yes.
Yeah, this concerns me slightly. Brian made a very good point that we have this enormous expertise, companies providing services to offshore oil and gas, and they're no longer encouraged. And I'm just wondering where the borderline is. For example, if a company was taking part in one of this quite large-scale wind power projects along the coast, I think it's east of Georgetown, or was involved in some of the small hydro projects which are going on up country, and yet they're an oil and gas service company, but they're providing similar services. Where is the dividing line? It seems a little confusing for anybody trying to break into those markets.
Jonathan, I will jump in with the answer, I think. But Sherwin will no doubt correct me if I get it wrong. My understanding is if you're involved in renewables, so wind, solar, whatever, it doesn't actually matter whether you're an oil services company. You're actually doing a renewables contract. Is that understanding correct, Sherwin?
Absolutely, Greg. Because we still have DIT support for companies such as BP or Shell, but in the renewable space. So definitely we can support activities in energy transition. The renewable space, we can support companies, but with the support, we cannot support, or we no longer provide any new direct financial or promotional support for fossil fuel energy, for the fossil fuel energy overseas.
Thank you. That answers my question.
Brilliant. Thank you all very much. And I'll now hand over to Brett. Brett.
Thank you very much, Greg, for chairing. And it's been great today to hear, Sherwin, all the many ways that you can continue to support UK businesses exploring this new energy frontier. And Nicholas, thank you also for your insights. And Richard, I think the Chamber's influence and breadth and depth is incredibly useful. So, thanks Nicholas, thanks Richard, thanks Sherwin, And thanks also to our Scots on the call today. We've been very lucky to have a former UK Energy Minister, and also some insights, I think, from the early days of oil and how things played out. And I think, as Greg says, we've always been looking at how can Guyana make the most of the opportunity, but also is there anything we should be trying to avoid and not have to go through in the Guyana Basin to keep life easier for all of its people and businesses. So thank you to all our speakers today. Now, just maybe one more thing from myself, and that is a save the date. And we will be back with our next gateway, which is to Norway, and it will be on the 22nd and 23rd of September, when we will be exploring for an 8th year our near energy Norway. So the gateway concept continues. All welcome as always. And I believe Stacey already has the Eventbrite and the LinkedIn links live, so you can register for that if you're interested in collaboration between Norway and UK. And I know Norway are also, of course, present in different ways in the Caribbean and Latin America too. So a truly global opportunity in the gateways. But thank you for everyone's time. And Greg, thank you for chairing. And any questions, please feel free to reach out to myself, Stacey, or Greg on LinkedIn, and we will do our very best to answer them. Thank you and good afternoon.